let's do the final days of Nauvoo under the direction of Brigham Young and the Quorum of the 12. As you open the Saints Volume 2 book, you have this map showing the different places that people went during this time. The church is still young, but they're sending missionaries all over the world to grow the church. And the church grows dramatically in the 19th century. Hundreds of people are baptized in Europe, Scandinavia, and throughout the world as people are joining the church and coming to Zion to prepare for the second coming. We'll particularly be looking at the trek across the United States into Mexico, which became the United States, and there will be some talk about the islands, which I won't do very much of that because I want to talk about the church in general. As we start this section, we have Lucy Mack Smith addressing the saints in Nauvoo. She says,
Lucy Mack Smith, the prophet Joseph Smith's mother, addressed the saints in the last general conference held in Nauvoo, Illinois. She was old and feeble, a full 70 years old, and although she wanted to stay in Nauvoo with her family, none of which go to Utah except Hiram's wife, Mary Fielding Smith, she wanted to address the saints before they left.
Now, many people question Lucy Mack Smith's faithfulness for not following the saints west. But you have to remember that she wanted to stay in Nauvoo to be buried by her husband, and also to stay with her family members, which we'll see all stayed there as well.
Lucy Mack Smith addresses the saints, continued. Lucy knew the saints would help her make this journey if she chose to go. But Lucy was old and believed she would not live much longer. When she died, she wanted to be buried in Nauvoo near Joseph, Hiram, and other family members who had passed on, including her husband, Joseph Smith Sr.
Continue.
Furthermore, most of her living family members were staying in Nauvoo. Her only surviving son, William, had been a member of the Quorum of the 12, but he had rejected their leadership and refused to go west. Her 3 daughters, Sophronia, Catherine, and Lucy, were also staying behind. So too was her daughter-in-law, Emma, the prophet's widow.
Now we'll talk a lot about Emma during this time and her decision to stay. But the fact of the matter is, she should have gone west with the saints.
As Brigham says, you must be honest or you will not get there, she said. If you feel cross, you will have trouble. Lucy spoke more about her family, the terrible persecution they had suffered in Missouri and Illinois, and the trials that lay ahead for the saints. I pray that the Lord may bless the heads of the church, Brother Brigham and all, she said. When I go to another world, I want to meet you all.
As a result of her decision to stay, and her family's decision to stay, and Emma's decision to stay, we have no known descendants of Joseph in the church for many, many years. Eventually, we have a handful of descendants, but they don't even know their descendants who are from church historians. On the other hand, Hiram Smith's legacy stands strong in the church. His wife, widowed by his death, came to Utah with the saints.
Hiram Smith's descendants. Hiram Smith's descendants have played significant roles in the history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Joseph F. Smith, his son, by Mary Fielding Smith, served as president of the LDS Church from 1901 to 1918. His grandson, Joseph Fielding Smith, also served as president of the church from 1970 to 1972. His eldest son, John Smith, served as the church's presiding patriarch from 1855 to 1911. John Smith's descendants held this post from 1912 to 1932, and from 1942 to 1979, when the office was effectively discontinued and the incumbent Eldred G. Smith was given the title Patriarch Emeritus. M. Russell Ballard, the current acting president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles of the LDS Church, is also a direct descendant of Hiram.
So we see from this that small things bring about great things. Mary Finley Smith followed the Saints west, and because of that, her son, grandson, and other descendants have become great leaders in the church. There's many more than this. I just showed you the main key ones. Hiram Smith's legacy continues strong in our church, while through M. Russell Ballard, while Joseph Smith's legacy is non-existent. My friends, there's a great lesson here for us to learn about the history of the church. Faithfulness brings forth blessings. It's always the key to follow the prophet. Mary Finley follows the prophet and has many descendants of leaders of the church, even though her husband had been killed. Emma does not, and as a result has no known descendants in the church, at least none that are leaders.
Nauvoo under apostolic leadership. Bishops Whitney and Miller were made trustees in trust of all church property and funds. The church on both continents was divided into districts with a high priest presiding over each. Teachers, deacons, and 70s quorums organized and expanded, especially the 70s quorums, including anyone that desired to go forth abroad and preach the gospel. 70s Hall was completed for the preparing of missionaries, library, public speaking, museum. By far the leading quorum in the church, there were 35 quorums of the 70 by the end of the Nauvoo era, while there had only been 11 in Kirtland, Ohio. Men wanted to be joined and were set apart as members of the 70s quorums for one reason and one reason only. They wanted to share the gospel as missionaries. These missionaries took the gospel to all the world from then until now. We topped 1 million in 2007.
Now, this is an example of where a lot of changes occurred in the church as far as the quorums go. I remember when I was a kid, there were a lot of 70s in our ward and stake, and of course they were all released by President Kimball and made emeritus, and only the 70s quorum became a general authorities quorum. But for at the time, there were 70s quorums all throughout the church, and everybody wanted to be a member of the 70s because they wanted to go out and preach the gospel. Nowadays we have missionaries who are elders. It's interesting that the only people that have the title elder nowadays are general authorities and missionaries. Missionaries serve all throughout the world. There's over 1 million now in 2007. So I wouldn't say that the excitement to share the gospel has decreased or diminished, but it was much more of a sacrifice to share the gospel then, because most missionaries were married men, and they left their families, their wife and children, to go serve the mission. And sometimes they brought back a plural wife, which is always exciting. My own grandfather brought back a plural wife and built a house in Fayette, and he and his 2 wives lived there together after his mission. This is a picture of the rebuilt 70s Hall Nauvoo. Of course, it wasn't, this is the original one, but it was one that was rebuilt, and missionaries would go in here and they would study the languages of the world. They would practice giving speeches to each other, and there's a really nice scene there if you go down. Make sure you go to 70s Hall, because you can see where the missionaries practice preaching. You can also see the many things that they studied and learned, trying to learn about different cultures around the world.
The 12 also continued to weed apostate elements out of the church. Brigham Young recounted a dream where he saw a fruit tree with dead branches at the top, which had to be pruned away so the tree could flourish. He argued, "Let us cut off the dead branches of the church, that good fruit may grow, and a voice will soon be heard, 'Go up and build Zion and the temple of the Lord.'"
I guess apostates have always been a problem we've had to deal with, my friends, from the very early beginnings of the church. After Joseph's death, there were several people who accepted Brigham as the president of the church. The majority did. There's about 5,000 who did not. There's Strangites. There's a lot of different other break-off groups that left the church because they did not believe Brigham was the new leader. And so we have to be careful that we're always following the living prophet. I think about President Nelson and how he's easily one of the oldest men in the church, He's so fit, he's fit as a fiddle. He's leading us on to greatness. We need to make sure we always follow the prophet and not be part of these dead branches that are cut off.
Nauvoo continued to flourish, prosper, and grow. This caused anti-Mormons in Hancock County to push for the revoking of the Nauvoo City Charter. Mormons were accused of harboring criminals who escaped justice because of the powerful charter. Members of the church published articles in local newspapers pledging to find all criminals and execute justice speedily upon them. Despite these efforts, the charter was finally revoked by the state legislature in January of 1845.
The Nauvoo Charter kind of made the church its own country in Illinois. It was a very, very powerful charter that gave us a lot of powers to create a university, to create our own police force, etc. And the members of the church, the enemies of the church realized that in order to get rid of the church, they had to finally revoke the Nauvoo Charter, which they finally do in January of 1845. This is a terrible blow to the Saints because up to this point, they had their own police force, they had their own army, they had their own everything. Once the Nauvoo Charter was revoked, those things were taken away. This is the beginning of the end. Now, one of the advantages of doing Saints 2 is that we stay in a lot of things you haven't studied yet. One of the disadvantages is that we haven't covered a lot of the things that we should have already covered. I'll try to cover this as best I can as we go along.
Nauvoo continued to grow and flourish despite these setbacks. Many log homes replaced by brick homes, giving Nauvoo a feeling of permanency. Nauvoo's spectacular growth only increased the antagonism of the church's enemies. It was evident that the death of Joseph Smith had not diminished the strength of the saints. The enemies of the church supposed that it would not endure without its charismatic leader, and when they saw that the church was not only surviving, but was flourishing, their attempts to drive the saints from the state were intensified.
I'm going to speak to this for just a minute. One of the brilliance of Joseph Smith's methods was, during his lifetime, he went from giving all the speeches and all the talks and doing all the directing to really going into displaying the woodwork and becoming a backstage person. As you notice in the Doctrine and Covenants, we have many, many revelations at the beginning of the history of the church that are received by Joseph Smith. As we continue on, section 124 is the only one that's received by him the entire time he's in Nauvoo, because he's letting the local leaders take over the church. He's letting the brethren do it. So when he dies, there's not a problem because they become used to running the church without him anyway. This is a brilliant plan that still exists today. While we all recognize President Nelson as the president of our church, and he's doing a lot of directing now with his methods of having church at home, we still run the church on a local level pretty much without his help. We have the guidance and direction of the handbooks of the church for the most part. So leaders are doing it. And that's the brilliance of Joseph Smith. After he died, the church was able to run without him. That's a remarkable feat.
8 individuals, including 5 prominent citizens, were acquitted of Joseph Smith's murder, and Hyrum Smith's murder trial never occurs.
This is extremely unfortunate because Joseph and Hyrum were murdered, but the people that were responsible for the murder were never brought to justice. This was one more thing that led to the saints leaving Nauvoo, was the fact that Joseph and Hyrum's murderers were never brought to trial. They were never convicted of the crimes. Now, I don't think this could happen today. Back then, it happened a lot. And this is not just that it happens to us, but the sense that this is the way the country was run back then. And it's very terrible. It looks worse today than it really was back then. It was pretty normal.
Apparently free from any legal reprisals, Thomas Sharp unleashed a new anti-Mormon volley in the Warsaw Signal in the summer of 1845.
Thomas Sharp was the editor of the Warsaw Signal, and he became the primary enemy of the church. And while we talked a lot about him in Saints Volume 1, he becomes the leader of the at least the newspaper volleys against the saints.
He opposed Latter-day Saint office holders in the county and reopened the debate over Mormon political activity. These actions provided a smokescreen for a barrage of vandalism against the saints.
As Thomas Sharp publishes his articles in the newspaper and really takes the offensive against the church, it allows many people to perform what we would call misdemeanors or acts of crime against the saints, particularly those living on the outskirts of Nauvoo or Ramus or the other areas of the church.
Mormon homes in outlying areas burned, and people's lives threatened in the infamous wolf hunts.
They would go on these quote-unquote wolf hunts just as a guise to really destroy the property of the church that's living on the outskirts of town. And so Jacob Atkinstos tries to do something about it, isn't very successful.
Brigham Young organized wagon trains to gather all saints in outlying areas into Nauvoo proper. Jacob Atkinstos, the Hancock County Sheriff, tries to defend the saints, but is chased out of town by the mobbers. When he deputized several members of the church, including Porter Rockwell, they were able to defend themselves against mobs.
Porter Rockwell, for all of his faults, was actually very good with the gun and very good at this kind of thing. And as soon as he's made a deputy sheriff, he is able to bring things under control. But the saints are being attacked. Now, if this happened today, it would be on the news and it would be on CNN and everybody in the world would know about it. Back then, they didn't have those opportunities, and so this is pretty much becomes a what we would call a very quiet attack in that it wasn't publicized in the newspapers.
Governor Ford was able to avoid civil war by sending 4 prominent state officials, including Stephen A. Douglas, to keep peace in Hancock County. Douglas encouraged the saints to move west and promised to use his political influence to help them if they did. Saints agreed to leave by the spring of 1846, as soon as there is sufficient prairie grass to sustain their cattle.
Now, at this time, we're being attacked on every side. We're being attacked from the east by all the mobs, etc. But now, Governor Ford telling us that we're going to get attacked from the west as well. As we try to go west, they're going to try to stop us. As the Latter-day Saints continued throughout the remainder of the 19th century to establish theocratic social orders called Zion, they merged political, economic, and social and religious life. Democratic and Republican constitutionalists. So the Mormons had a toxic social and political threat. Kathleen Clayton noted the following, quote, America's problem with Latter-day Saints was not simply primarily a matter of unlawful action, but of conflicting authority. This is an important point. The Latter-day Saints appealed to the law of their God, given to modern prophets to justify their resistance to the law of the land. The Latter-day Saint morality, affected by the priestly order, confronted American morality, affected by a Protestant legal establishment. The philosophical underpinnings of the First Amendment were made explicit. The conflict arose between the nation with the soul of a church, the church with the soul of a nation. Let me repeat that. The nation with the soul of a church, and the church with the soul of a nation. The Mormon problem made it obvious that by not establishing any religion, the Constitution subordinated every religion's authority over believers to the state's authority over citizens. So, the church wanted to have the church be the primary political and otherwise authority, but the government wanted the government to be the final authority, with the churches being subordinated to them. We had the government subordinated to the church, they had the church subordinated to the government, and it didn't match. So we're going to see a huge problem with the Zion concept, with the church being placed over the government to the Democratic Republicanism, where the government is placed over the church. That's going to be the primary problem here for the rest of the 19th century.
Throughout this period, Brigham Young and members of the 12 kept work on the temple moving. Rooms in the temple were dedicated as they were completed so that ordnance work could begin as early as possible.
This was a time of terrible stress among the brethren, my friends. They're being attacked on every side. We know we have to leave, but they're trying to finish the temple at the same time. And as the rooms in the temple are completed, they are to dedicate one room at a time and hurry and try to do the much work as possible with the ordinances.
Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball began giving endowments to faithful Latter-day Saints on the evening of the 10th of December. On the 11th of December, endowment sessions were continued until 3 a.m. When enemies of the church observed this increased temple activity, they renewed their oppression.
So no one that's listening to this class has ever experienced what the saints are experiencing here. You've got attacks, literally attacks, not pseudo-attacks, attacks from the West. And while we're being attacked, while the saints are being mobbed, etc., they're trying to finish the temple so that many people can receive the ordinances as possible. We don't have anything like this today in the church, nothing like this. This is all new. This is all new for us.
The brethren redoubled their efforts to endow as many saints as possible before the evacuation of Nauvoo began. By the end of 1845, over 1,000 members had received these ordinances.
But that's 1,000 of 16,000, so only 1 in 16 are receiving the ordinances by then.
In January, Brigham Young recorded, "I have given myself up entirely to the work of the Lord in the temple, night and day, not taking more than 4 hours sleep upon an average per day, and going home but once a week."
Try to imagine what it's like, my friends. They've got a temple that's in the process of being completed. They're performing ordinances there. They're being attacked from the west by the mobs, etc. They're trying to get rid of the saints. And meanwhile, the saints are trying to do everything in their power to receive the ordinances, but also to prepare to leave Nauvoo because they're being run out by the mobs. This is a time of terrible stress, a time of terrible antagonism, and so the brethren just go in the temple and stand there and try to give the people the ordinances as quickly as possible, while the people are preparing their wagons, etc., to leave, while at the same time being attacked by mobs.
See that? On the 3rd of February, the brethren planned to stop the ordinance work, and Brigham Young left the temple to make final preparation to leave the next day for the West. But seeing a large crowd gathered to receive their endowments, he compassionately returned to serve them. This delayed his departure for another 2 weeks.
Oops. Guys.
Tuesday, February 3rd, 1846. Notwithstanding that I had announced that we would not attend to the administration of the ordinances, the house of the Lord was thronged all day, the anxiety being so great to receive, as if the brethren would have us stay here and continue the endowments until our way would be hedged up and our enemies would intercept us.
Brothers and sisters, this is not wise. To remain here may put our very lives in danger.
we will yet build more temples and have further opportunities to receive the blessings of the Lord. In this temple we have been abundantly rewarded, if we receive no more. It is my intention now to go home, hitch up my wagons, and be off. I recommend the same for you. I walked some distance from the temple, supposing the crowd would disperse. But on returning, I found the house filled to overflowing. Come, my friends. Let us go in. Looking upon the multitude and knowing their anxiety as they were thirsting and hungering for the word, I continued at work diligently in the house of the Lord. 295 persons received ordinances.
Meanwhile, Wilford Woodruff served another mission in England to supervise the work there and in Europe. Parley P. Pratt was sent to the eastern states to put the church in order, which was desperately needed. All manner of false doctrine and evil practices were being participated in. While there, he published the first proclamation to the world.
What's been interesting to me is to see the fifth and sixth proclamations published to the world in our day. The fifth, of course, was the proclamation on the family, and the sixth was read last Congress by President Nelson.
Long before he died, the prophet Joseph had discussed moving the church to the west. In 1842, he had prophesied that the saints would continue to suffer much affliction, and some of you will live to go and assist in making settlements and build cities, and see the saints become a mighty people in the midst of the Rocky Mountains. The planned move west gave some people an excuse to lead away groups from the church. Joseph Smith had authorized Lyman White and Bishop George Miller to establish a colony in Texas. However, they eventually rejected the authority of the 12 and refused to gather west with the other saints.
I think what you'll find is, as you see these apostate groups, you probably not heard of very many of them. My guess is that there's not very many of you that have heard of Bishop George Miller, even though he was a very prominent person during the Noah period of the church. It's possible you haven't even heard of Lyman Wright, who was also a prominent person during this period. These people lead small groups off from the church, and they basically disappear into the woodwork. They become non-existent later in our lives.
Brigham Young and his colleagues wanted to stay in Illinois until the temple was completed, and adequate preparations were made for the departure. During the winter of 1844 through 1845, they read the journals of fur trappers, the reports of government exploring parties, and newspaper articles by Western travelers to accumulate as much information about the region as possible. California, Oregon, and Texas were considered, but gradually the east rim of the Great Basin was decided upon. Leaders of the church assured the saints, some of whom were surprised at the announcement, that the Exodus was a well-planned transplanting necessary to give the church the room it needed to grow.
I don't think it's very possible for members of the church today to imagine what it would have been like to have the church transplanted. But that's exactly what they're doing. They're going to leave Nauvoo completely. They're going to transplant the church to a place that none of them have ever been to before, the Great Basin, where we live now today. I am, to be really honest, grateful that I was born when I was. Not have to go through all this terribleness.
Through the fall of 1845, Nauvoo was alive with preparations. Nearly every workshop in the city had been converted into a wagon maker's shop. By the end of the year, 3,000 families had been organized, and 2,000 wagons were completed or nearly finished.
Now that sounds like a lot of wagons. That's 2,000 wagons for 16,000 people. It's just not enough. What we're going to find in our next class, which we want to do, we'll do next time, is how terribly unprepared the saints were to leave Nauvoo, and what a cost it was to cross the state of Iowa.
However, once again, the U.S. government on the federal, state, and local levels continued to put up barriers. Governor Floyd, Illinois, hinted that it is very likely that the government in Washington will interfere to prevent the Mormons from going west of the Rocky Mountains, because it was believed that the Mormons would join the British if they go there and be more trouble than ever.
At this particular time in the history of the United States ended at the age of Missouri. So I think western Missouri was either belonged to the Mexicans, or belonged to the French, or belonged to the British. So it was believed that we were going to go west and join with these people and fight, come back east, and join with these crowds of foreigners and fight against the United States of America. So even though it wasn't true, it was made to believe that the United States was made to believe that the saints were against the United States, and they were going to go. The only reason they were going west was to find these people that become president and then come back and fight against the United States.
The Oregon question was not settled with Britain, nor would it be until 1846, when negotiations finally guaranteed Oregon would be part of the American Republic. Therefore, for the time being, war with Britain and Mexico was a real possibility. Accelerating matters even further were the more immediate and real threats of arrest and assassination. With Joseph Smith gone, local civil authorities were wanting Brigham Young in his place.
And so Brigham Young's life was in danger, just like Joseph's life had been, because the non-members can't figure out why the church still exists with Joseph gone, not realizing the very established church organization that he established before he died.
Bogus Brigham. In order to avoid the constant barrage of federal marshals, Brigham Young had a man who had an uncanny resemblance to him distract them, as they would constantly arrest this man in the place of Brigham, with the intent to kill him. He would tell them his name, William Miller, and they would let him go. This kept Brigham Young safe for the time being.
This is a picture of the bogus Brigham, William Miller, and it kept Brigham Young alive for about a year in Nauvoo. We're so thankful this man was willing to be taken over and over again, and the federal marshals only to be sure that he was William Miller and not Brigham Young, and allowed Brigham Young to stay safely in the temple and to continue to work.
Faced with the prospects of imminent arrest, assassination attempts, possible federal intervention, and the increasing tempo of defection and apostasy, the Company of the 12 decided once and for all to terminate temple work and depart quickly and quietly, weeks before their announced march departure date.
This was necessary to save their lives. Unfortunately, the 12 go back and forth across the Nile River several times. They don't actually start their trek west until March 1st. But leaving it very forth allows them to avoid the Martians returning to kill them, and keeps the church safe, relatively safe for the time being.
Leaving the same day, quite by accident, Sam Brannan guided a group of saints from the Atlantic in the Pacific Ocean, stopping in Hawaii on the way. Brannan was the highest presiding religious leader on the ship. He brought along an antiquated printing press and a complete flour mill to make colonization easier. The ship stopped on June 30th, 1846 in Honolulu, Hawaii to resupply.
Sam Brannan is one of the true heroes in church history that later becomes an apostate because he won't follow the brethren. His only problem was he was really headstrong and he believed that the saints should go all the way to California and that California should be the gathering place, not Utah.
While there, he found out about the United States' planned assault of the Mexicans at Monterey. This information, along with Commodore Stockholm's quiet encouragement, led Samuel Brannan to the idea of taking the port town of Yerba Buena. After leaving Hawaii, the Brooklyn changed routes, landing on July 31st, 1846, at the Mexican port town of Yerba Buena. The Mormons began colonizing the area, present-day San Francisco, and tripled the population of the pueblo.
Sam Brannan's story is truly a sad story of a person who believes that he's found the place for the saints to rest, but he really hadn't. He is in constant conflict with Brigham Young. Will continue his story much later. On Tuesday, February 4th, the first events began quietly crossing the Mississippi River, settling temporarily at Sherry Creek, Iowa. Although plans were well laid, the panicking saints left ill prepared for the journey. Quincy has become one of the greatest migrations in human history. Brigham Young told me had been able to flee from their enemies. They would never get away from their own people. Now, my friends, I have to tell you this. The story I'm going to tell you the next few weeks is a very sad story. It's a story of pain and suffering and tribulation. The miracle here is not how easy it was for the saints to cross the West. The miracle is that they stayed members of the church despite how difficult it was to cross the West. The 12 don't know what to do because it would have been difficult enough with considering the rain and all the problems in Iowa. But the main problem was the saints didn't have enough food and preparations. They left panicking, and that caused major problems, as we'll see. As I try to tell you the history of the church you know so well, and the history of the church that you don't know very well. I hope you'll be patient with me as we try to do this. I would imagine testimony that the 12 were led by Brigham Young. They know the right way to go. They're led by the Lord, despite the many challenges that they'll face along the way. I say this in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.